So let's go remind ourselves, nobody does UN peacekeeping these days, so Canada doesn't need to contribute UN troops anymore. Well, clearly that is a myth. That is a myth. And UN peacekeeping is more active than ever, this year breaking the previous record for the number of blue helmets. And it's Canada that's abandoned the UN, has abandoned UN peacekeeping. Once the #1 contributor, we're now ranking 52 of 97, and as I mentioned, the latest information is that we've dropped below 60, or only 56 soldiers. In fact, today you can take all our peacekeepers and fit them on a single school bus. Now, so if you look at this, the UN is making an incredible contribution in the world in some of the darkest parts of the world, mostly in Africa, the places that is not getting on the front pages of the newspaper anymore. But it's incredibly effective. It's making a difference, and Canada is not making its own fair share contribution. We are freeloaders on the United Nations. Canada spends too little money on defense, about as much as Luxembourg. Is this a fact or is it a myth? Well, Mythbusters, let's put it to the test. I say let's go to NATO, and here are the top military spenders in NATO. #1 is the United States, followed by France, the UK, Germany, then we have Italy, Russia by comparison. #6 is Spain. Canada is #7. Turkey's #8. And in fact, there's 26 members of NATO, so this list goes, right down into the basement, into the parking garage here. And we're still within the top 10 at $11.6 billion US in 2004. Dollar for dollar, we are a very high military spender. There are different ways to measure military spending and compare it. There's a per capita method by comparing to how many people are in your country. But most analysts don't use that because it understates China and India. So that's probably the least best way to do it. Let's take a look at the historical trends of Canada's military spending here. Okay, we've tracked Canada's military spending from 1980 up until 2011. Okay? So we've got this line on the chart here, and you see it's got a big bump during the 1980s, a decline during the 1990s, and then it starts going up again. I just want to point out a couple of things to you. And I should say these numbers are all adjusted, okay? So we're all talking about $2005, so we've taken inflation into consideration. So the big increases actually happened during Trudeau's time, not really during Mulroney. It was Trudeau that really boosted military spending in the early part of the 1980s. Mulroney, during the Conservatives, certainly increased it during this period until we get up to this point, which is 1990. What happened in 1990? Thank you. End of the Cold War. Berlin Wall falls. Okay? So all military budgets around the world begin to go on the decline. And Canada was no different. The United States, Russia, everybody started reducing military spending. Up until the late 1990s, then you see a shift happen in Canada. Military spending starts going on the increase again. In fact, it's been going up ever since the late 1990s. And what happened at this point, this is 1998, 1998, 1999, an important factor occurred. The government slayed the deficit and began posting surpluses that year. It was the first time that the government started bringing in more money than it was paying out in social programs and transfers to the provinces. And the military started reaping the benefits of that. Money started going back into defense and has been on the increase ever since. Now, you'll note here that this chart is chopped off. It only goes to 2006, but I told you I was going to project it to 2011. Well, what's the rest of this look like? Well, I got to tell you. In 2005, there was a budget that the Liberals brought in, supported by the NDP, that put $12.8 billion into defense spending over 5 years. One of the big lobby groups in Ottawa, called the Conference of Defense Associations, when they saw the number, their response to a reporter was this: it's staggering. They said it's staggering. These are the guys that have complained for years that the military hasn't had enough money, and they had to admit that this was a huge increase in defense spending. Now, the Conservatives come along, and they top it up by another $5.3 billion on top of the $12.8 that the Liberal NDP budget of 2005 brought in. So I want to add this to the chart. Let's show you where it's going to go in the next 5 years. Practically off the chart. Look at that. Well over $20 billion, $21.5 billion to be precise, according to our new defense minister, Gordon O'Connor. $21.5 billion by 2010-11. And I'll just show you this dotted line is actually the Liberal NDP budget of 2005, and the blue line is the Conservatives. So pretty much the same. Both, all national parties supported this. An increase of 43.3% over 2005-06, 36.2% higher than at the end of the Cold War, the highest amount of spending since the Second World War. So, Canada spends too little money on defense, about as Luxembourg. Well, clearly it's a myth. In fact, dollar for dollar, Canada is the 15th highest military spender in the world and 7th highest in the 26-member NATO alliance. And military spending is on the rise and will soon surpass Cold War era levels. Okay, urban myth number 3, last one. Canada is at war in Afghanistan to help the poor, send girls to school, and maybe even save kittens. So again, Canada is at war in Afghanistan to help the poor, send girls to school, and maybe even save kittens. Clearly, it's a myth. Canada took part in the 2001 invasion, the NATO-led peace support mission, and the counterinsurgency war in the south, to which we are there today, to assist the U.S. war on terror and to curry favor with the Bush administration. Any benefits in terms of development or aid or protection of human rights for women is secondary. While laudable and important and certainly critical to do, that is not the reason why we're there. We are there to assist the war on terrorism, and as long as it's a priority in the United States, we will continue to be there. In the old days, and even today, they used to drop leaflets out of airplanes, right, behind the enemy lines. They would say, "Give up. There's no hope. Surrender," And this is called like a psychological operation in military terms. Now, I think we are undergoing our own psychological operation today, that the military is using the equivalent of leaflets in Afghanistan or where have you, but using it through the media, through analysts, through whatever means they can to try to rewrite our history, to make us forget that we were once the #1 contributor of UN peacekeeping troops, and to help us get on side with the war on terrorism. So it's a mixed track record. You can see this is a constant struggle, tug of war really, between these two visions and our forces. And there's been it's not completely one-sided. You see, the government said yes to the 2001 invasion of Afghanistan, but they said no to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. We got a no on missile defense in 2005, but a yes to military spending increases and a transformation of our military into something away from peacekeeping toward something that's much more useful for the U.S. War on terrorism. So in Ottawa today, this is what we're confronting. We are confronting the combined forces of the corporate lobby and the defense lobby. And what we need to do, and maybe take some of the lessons that we learned in the missile defense campaign and other struggles, is we need to create our own new peace lobby. We need a peace lobby in Ottawa that confronts the corporate and defense lobby on Parliament Hill, in the newsrooms, and on the streets across the country, wherever they go. Thank you so much.